Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Kulmeet, let me add my personal welcome to you for this time that you're sharing with us. I can't think of a better person to talk about leadership in the new reality. So thank you. And I know that our viewers will be as thrilled as I am to have you here. So let me start out our discussion with something that is close to your heart. I know that one of the pillars of your leadership philosophy is shared vision. So tell us, how do you create the shared vision, and then how do you use it to engage your team, your employees?
Yeah, so thank you, Srini. Thank you for those kind words and the nice introduction. It's always good to hear good things about oneself, right? And these are tough times, so it's even more helpful. Should I say tough times or different times? But I guess it's always more helpful. And before I answer your question around shared vision, to the broader audiences, I'd just like to wish them a happy Diwali, a week away from Diwali, but a happy Diwali and a happy festive season nonetheless. And it's great to be here, so thank you for having invited me. Look, let me start with what you spoke about. In terms of what is a vision or a shared vision, in how I interpret it, right? So to me, a shared vision is nothing but it's about envisioning an idea that I like calling it larger than life, something that can truly move people, get them excited towards rowing in the same direction, right? And I'm quite infamous to talk about a lot of this to my teams because it is, at the end of it, all about envisioning the future or creating an image of what's possible. And then, of course, enlisting a lot of others around you into the shared view of that beautiful dream or vision or purpose or aspiration, call it what you will, right? Sometimes I say in a lighter way, may not be for this audience, it's almost like you're in love, right? Where you're actually focused on that one big thing that you're rowing towards. And I guess, why it is so important from my learnings over the years is because a shared vision actually and truly inspires people around you, helps your team see a deeper meaning to their work instead of merely as if they are performing routine or mundane tasks. It helps them realize that they are actually contributing to a much larger than life, a much bigger picture, and that they are an intrinsic part of the whole organizational success or a larger objective, right? There's something that I studied, or a program that I did about a decade and a half ago, Srini. And one of the statements that holds very good in my head is, it said, your past has nothing to do with who you are in the present. It is the future you are living into that actually determines who you are, right? And I've loved this, and I'll repeat it for the audience, but your past has nothing to do with who you are in the present. It is the future that you're living into that truly determines who you are today. And it sounds a little counterintuitive, but as an example, and I remember in those days, Srini is all ready, all set to get into a beautiful holiday at the Maldives. You're 3 days away from your holiday. You're in the middle of a quarter end, or depending on who you are, where you are, final examinations. Life could be worse than what it is, at that moment. And yet you're excited. Yet you're all vibrant because 3 days later you're flying into Maldives and that beautiful flight, bags packed, etc. So you're excited even in difficult times because you have that vision of where you are headed, right? And fast forward 10 days into the scene, you're lying on a beach with a beautiful margarita on your hand, or whatever is your poison, frankly, and you're low, you're down, you're morose. Reason being that the next evening you've got a flight back into your hometown, back into your workplace, right? So the present is brilliant, but the future is not so bright And back to my point on why a vision or a shared vision is so important. And I'm sorry if that analogy doesn't work, but it's the way I look at how you put a stake in the ground and work behind it. And to your, to the other point on how do you keep this vision alive, Srini? Because it's good to set something larger than life and, you know, watch it crumble or fall apart in due course. So, two big things that I've learned, and again, this is not the gospel. These are just learnings that I've picked up over the years. So the first way to keep it alive is, of course, to reiterate the big picture idea with the context or the why behind it for your people, right? So the why is very important because providing a meaning with the context actually gives people who are rowing with you a shared purpose. It helps keep them motivated. Your actions need to obviously align with the messaging, but if the underlying reason of what you are trying to achieve or the why is clearly explained, I think you start seeing magic start to happen, right? Uh, and more often than not, this why, and this is what I found. More often than not, this why need not even have a material angle to it. It could be just something that touches an emotional chord, right? Or a larger than life vision or goal, like in the army. And I spent my first decade in the army, Srini, and I was from a fighting arm. Uh, the why is always way above material aspects. And you can get people to lay down their lives for something way larger than themselves, something that they identify, which of course could be patriotism, could be their their entire patriotism for their regiment or for their battalion or for whichever in the corporate world for the organization you belong to. So the first big piece of keeping it alive is, the why behind it or the context, and the second one is simpler. And the way I look at it is, it's critical to build that trust or credibility and transparency, pillars around which I guess every successful business, every successful team actually succeeds. So people need to feel valued and engaged. It will create magic. It will inculcate a culture of innovation and collaboration. And like I said, it's a no-brainer, right? And I talk very often on appreciating the power of people, or the fact that people are your biggest assets, the ones who truly build organizations, are responsible for formulating the culture. So it's not you and me sitting behind the desk leading, it's the people who are actually building cultures in organizations. And shared visions come alive when you listen closely to others, get into their world, look at things through their lens, right? With a single avatar of how do you make them successful. So those were my, sorry, random thoughts, but my random thoughts around shared vision. Srini, back to you.
Thank you, Kulmeet. Something you said is profound. It's kind of stuck in my head, and that is really the shared vision is about leading us into the future. It is really giving us a sense of purpose, looking into the future, and that sense of purpose is larger than ourselves. It is for a collective goal, collective good. I really appreciate the way you put it. Thank you. Uh, one of the aspects of leading into the future is the new realities, and we are already, thanks to COVID, in a new reality, which is the virtual world. Whether that's a virtual office, whether that's a virtual team, whether that's in some cases even a virtual family for some of us. Uh, how do you look at leading in the virtual era as opposed to the more traditional leading a team that's in an office setting?
Yeah, Srini, absolutely. And I would have been surprised if that question hadn't come up because I was in another forum the other day, I think a few weeks ago, and something similar because I guess that's top of mind for everyone. To be frank, these are trying times, right? The world as we've known it has changed. We are seeing the impact on businesses and business models in entirety, and of course economies as a whole. And as individuals, I guess we have and we are continuing to experience shifts in our work life nuances due to lockdown or just pandemic restrictions, right? And sometimes they may be psychological and sometimes they are real. But I guess the world as we knew it is changing. Let me just try and handle that. Giving my example, look, I came into this new role at SAP about a little under 4 months ago, right? Which was totally or absolutely in the midst of the lockdown and getting into a new organization in the midst of a pandemic. I guess is challenging because at the core of any setup, the way we've learned it over the years, over the decades, are human relationships, right? And I keep talking about the power of people, but they are human relationships, and frankly, trying to see your team or meet your team for a few hours virtually isn't the same as being able to interact in person, share moments of togetherness around coffee corners. It's a different reality, right? Or for that matter, trying to forge brand new alliances with the ecosystem or building trust across a screen. And I repeat, across a screen with people you've never met, talking to a screen on a one-way broadcast. Now that was a new one, right? There was no one smiling at you because it was one way, and you had to give a 30-minute talk on something. How do you generate empathy hundreds of miles away, right? So while social distancing has become a norm, I don't think socially distant means emotionally distant. And if it does mean emotionally distant, then we are up for trouble. So let me just say that yes, times are different from what we are used to. And to answer your point on the shift on leadership, look, and it's not today, COVID, pre COVID, post COVID. I've always believed that there are no set scripts or lists of do's and don'ts that a leader can follow, right? And especially in times like this, I remember many decades ago when I transitioned from the army to the civvy street. I was asked about. I was on a forum like this on a stage, and they wanted me to define leadership, and it was too much because we had leadership ingrained in us from the age of 16, which is when we joined the academy. And so to my point, there is no set script or a list of do's or don'ts. But in fact, I firmly believe that the traditional traits of leadership or the tenets, the way we've learned it or grown up on, hold absolutely strong in this crisis too, right? And this is what I said the other day, because at the end of the day, it is still people that you're leading, whether it is within your organization, whether it's customers, whether it's the direct ecosystem. And the people equation doesn't change really, at least in my parlance, right? Look, in fact, to me, it's a good time to sift on how strong the bedrock is, or to revisit the foundational elements of, people-centric leadership. I won't say servant leadership because that's a lot of, but I would just say simple foundational elements of people leadership. It's good to revisit and see how we are doing as leaders, and you know, passion and excitement, of course, are even more critical at a time like this. And you can always tell, right, from the tone or the body language, and sometimes not to get philosophical, but even from your silence, right? So you can talk about passion, you can tell about passion or commitment, or I guess it becomes evident. So that's one thing that I think needs to be maintained at a time like this. And uh, my one piece of advice to the broader audience, and going back to my definition of leadership 17 years ago or 15 years ago, is that every one of you is a leader, right? Each and every one of us is a leader. You don't need pips on your shoulders or external ratification that you're a leader. Now you need to reach out, or each one of us needs to reach out and grasp what's out there, where you can make a difference or an impact. So it's my point is that leadership is never limited or confined to job descriptions or JDs or this is your role, Kulmeet, or this is your role, irrespective of what level you're at. And so I would urge people to actually step out, especially at times like this within the pandemic where the world has changed. And I won't say challenging and bad and tough, and those are words that are that are weak for me. But times are difficult, times are different, right? And I would urge everyone to bring out the leader in yourself in whichever fashion. Go out and grasp what's there and make a difference. Because I truly believe, Srini, that leadership isn't an end goal, right? It's just a journey one walks with people, with people as their top priority. So it's not about a end point that you achieve. It's about the journey that you walk and travel, all through the decades and through the ages. Srini, back to you.
Thank you. Kulmeet, I think the audience would be as fascinated as I am to learn that you took on your new leadership role at SAP right in the middle of the pandemic, and knowing you and how social you are and what a people person you are, I can only imagine what a challenge it must have been to as you rightly said, to be able to lead without being able to see how the people are reacting right off the bat. But something you said a minute ago caught my eye, and that is, in the midst of this new form of leadership, you talked about the importance of keeping people together, whether that's a shared vision, whether that's some kind of a cohesive path that you're all following. Can you speak a little bit more about the social cohesion, and how do you create the framework for that?
Yeah, thanks, Srini. And look, like I said, there is no gospel coming from me. They're just learnings, right? And very often I call them, one of the books I read in school. So I call them learnings or musings of a reluctant. I would call it a Messiah, but that said, a reluctant Messiah. But anyway, so there are no set scripts. You learn along the way. But to your point, a few things that have really stood out for me, and I'm happy to share a couple of them. Especially in times like this, to increase bonding and motivation and social cohesion, as you mentioned, since the world as we learned changed, right? So one, of course, is the importance of communication. I think that's super critical. Just your presence as a leader, especially when the chips are down or when it's times like this, even if it's virtual, right, is all the more important. You need to be talking there to your people. You need to be there with your people. And along with that communication, I guess there needs to be genuineness, there needs to be authenticity, there needs to be transparency. When you're dealing with people, whether it is within your ecosystem or in the broader ecosystem, and I won't limit this just to the workplace, right? I would say all across your ecosystem, there has to be authenticity and transparency. But the most important thing is communicate often enough, communicate with clarity to ensure that the message gets reinforced. And like at SAP, I said over the last few months, uh, you can decide different formats for communication. And we've been trying out a lot of them, to be fair, right? We've got the large format gatherings with thousands of people on it. We've got smaller conclaves with different cross sections within the organizations. We could have diversity groups. We are having early talent conclaves. We've got smaller team formats. So whatever works, but the message being that communicate more often, than you deem necessary, right? So you can't go wrong even if you over communicate. So that's my first bit, trying to get people together. The second, of course, which is a no-brainer, all the more important at a time like this, is compassion and empathy. And I mentioned it earlier. How do you get into the other person's world and try and view life through their lens? Because look, the reality that I've made for myself behind the screen in my office room, with my privacy available and with my backup in terms of my generators, etc., may not be the reality for someone across the screen, right? So it's working conditions have changed. We do not have the luxury of those, what we said, the in-person interactions or the social signals that we are so used to. Fashion is only for the top half of the body these days, and you're seeing a booming market there. Therefore, you need to make extra efforts to understand the needs of others as you weigh your own priorities and decisions, right? And just as an example, there again, productivity has gone up manyfold, right? Uh, while I'm loving parts of it, I'm not loving a lot of it also. There is no travel, but then again, the good part is there is no standing in lines and behind security at airports or in traffic jams, which is fantastic with work from home. But then there is also the fear of burnout, right? So how do you balance the work life both for yourself as well as your teams? So I guess the message I'm bringing, Srini, is that it's all the more important at a time like this to be more aware of people, across what they could be undergoing, especially during this pandemic. And like I say with everything else, uh, it's very, very important, along with authenticity, to personalize what you do. So personalization and individualization and real-time experiences is, for me, it's not just something that we talk about in the digital world, right? It's even more important in the real world or in the physical world, right? Because you could choose less. You could have fitness competitions. We launched something called Thank Goodness It's Friday with our teams, just to keep them excited, giving them the second half of Friday for themselves, or the fervor that the teams built around Diwali with the personalized gifts and the personalized messaging. But the message being that personal and family well-being comes first, always and every time. And I'll end with, and I'm sorry, it's something that stuck with me from the age of 19. And this was when we, for the broader audience, when you pass out of the Indian Military Academy, the last step that you take, you have the Shetwood motto, right? And I can see Srini nodding, but and the way we learned it was it was imbibed into us that the safety, honor, and welfare of your country comes first, always, and every time. The honor, welfare, and comfort of the men you command comes next. Your own ease, comfort, and safety come last, always, and every time. And I guess the 12, 13 years, the decade plus that I spent in the army, that was always right where it belonged. And I guess some of that is what we follow, what I've been following, at least in the corporate world. Srini, back to you. I could go on for hours otherwise.
No, Kulmeet, that was fascinating. Thank you. There were a lot of takeaways for me. But what I got most out of your answer was that as a leader, one has to lead by example. One has to be authentic. One has to be empathetic, and one has to be compassionate, especially in these times when the people are scattered all over. Your team is remote, your team is distributed, your team is across borders in many cases. This authenticity and compassion and the empathy, I can see how it becomes very, very crucial as the glues for the social cohesion that you're talking about. Let me move on to another aspect of leadership, which I know is also very close to your heart, and that is values. You just talked a minute about the IMA's credo, the Chetwode credo. Uh, those are values that all young officers are expected to live by. And when you look at your leadership journey, what are in your mind the most important values that you have kept front and center with you?
Yeah, thanks, Srini. Look, I'll talk about a couple of them. While I've spoken of some of them may be a reiteration, but and then I'd like to give a couple of things that have helped me in good stead over the years. But I think the first and foremost, and I talk about it a lot, is integrity. And by integrity, I don't just mean integrity the way we understand it, right? To me, integrity is the bedrock of all discipline, right? And integrity could be as simple as just to do what you said you would do, to be on time for something. The smallest of things, I would package them all my life into something called integrity, right? And I know this is not the typical way we use the word integrity in the corporate world, but to me that's been a very very critical part from the very early years, right? And I would merge discipline as a part of the integrity, because that is a bedrock. That's something that I personally learned very very early. First time I walked into the haloed gates of the National Defense Academy at the age of 16, I guess that's where the discipline piece started, and probably over the next few decades culminated into integrity. So that's point number one. The second piece, of course, is, and I've said it a few times already. For me, it's about it has to be about people, right? Because I remember when I transitioned, and this was almost 16 17 years ago, from the army into the corporate world. I used to have a lot of media wanting to hear on how difficult it is and tell us some stories, Kulmeet. And my answer was, look, I never faced a challenge, because it was all about people there, and it's all about people here. So if you look at it, whether it's above you or below you in an organization or in the ecosystem of partners or customers, you're actually dealing with people, right? And there's nothing more fascinating to me, and that becomes a core. And I know these are not the typical values the way we're used to, but that is the bedrock of everything that I would stand by, right? So it's not about extraneous or external goals or bars being set by people, but you set your bar for yourself, and then live up to that bar. So integrity is one. The whole power of people that I talk about is the second piece. And the third thing, and again something that's helped me personally in good stead, is having a long term vision always, right? So how do you build a mindset to respond to inevitable challenges very quickly, right? And how do you harness them into becoming new opportunities? And the only way you can do that, I guess, is when you think long term, when you question the is, when you get back to the drawing board again and again, into questioning reality, right? And more so than ever, we've seen in times of COVID, everything that we held in good stead for decades before us has suddenly got into a question mark. And I guess unless you think long term, unless you think big picture, unless you're creative and you're willing to push boundaries to get into uncharted waters or uncharted territory, uh, you have chances of falling or flipping over every time you hit an obstacle, because you're thinking tactical, uh, you're thinking immediate rather than thinking long term. So that's the third piece in my head. And my one piece that I would like to leave with the audience, if I may, Srini, and unless of course you have more for me, but One is go create opportunity, right? Especially at times like this, because I've always believed that uh, every crisis has an opportunity hidden in it. There's an opportunity for change, right? With the pandemic today, companies, like I mentioned, have actually reinvented business models. Organizations have unique opportunities and a necessity to build probably what I would call more resilience or systemic resilience, right? So there is an advantage in adversity. I keep talking about playing for failure, right? And I've spoken about that very often because one is to fail and learn from your failure, but it's a second thing to actually consciously play for failure. And what I mean by that is that the amount you learn from every time you fail, you don't learn from years of success, Srini. So consciously, if you can make it a habit to it'll just get you more resilient, both as an individual as well as an organization. So the way I would put it is that think different, come up with ideas, no matter how crazy they are, right? So experiment and reinvent and get back to the drawing board, question the is, question learnings, forget about biographies. I'm not a fan of biographies. I've always hated history because it's somebody else's story, right? Uh, but be the unconventional leader and find opportunities, and I'm sure we'll see better times very quickly. Srini, back to you.
This is an education, really, because what I'm learning by listening to you is the whole set of values that you're talking about that are sacred to you really apply to all of us in anything we do. Because what I heard you say is some of the common principles are integrity, the people focus, having a long-term vision, and the ability to question, amongst other things. But the last thing you said is the one that I want to leave with the audience, which is make your own opportunities, make your own road. Because at PMI, we've been saying all along that we don't have to be defined by our job titles. You don't have to be a project manager, or a program manager, or a portfolio manager. We all have one thing in common, that is we make change happen. We're change makers. And that's what I heard from you as well. So this has been a real education, and especially learning from you some of the aspects that you've been able to make come alive based on your experience in the armed forces, then moving into the civilian world, and especially in the IT industry, and then taking over the reins of a global organization like SAP in the middle of the pandemic and steering this large team into the future is really fascinating. It's educational. We want to thank you for the time that you've taken to share your thoughts with us, and I'm sure the audience will join me in saying bravo, thank you for doing this. And just as a quick aside, one of our other speakers, Neetu Kaushal, has just taken over a large business unit of Hewlett Packard in Europe in the middle of the pandemic. And I'm sure she and you will have a lot in common to talk about in terms of experiences. So I will make that happen later. So thanks again, Kulmeet. Ladies and gentlemen, Kulmeet Bawa and his model of practical leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Shani. Thanks a lot. And thank you, everyone, once again for having me over. Thanks a lot.